Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Robertson Wesley, our time of devotion and exploration of our faith. My name is Reverend Karen Bridges. Reverend Lee is away right now, and it's just a great joy for me to be here with you today. It's been interesting in this time of physical separation. Things that we're starting to learn, starting to appreciate, starting to value more. And one of the things that I've always valued as a minister has been when people have been open and honest with me. When people have felt enough trust and comfort to share really important things about who they are, what they believe, what they long for, what their dreams are. I think people have learned to appreciate the fact that they're getting to know each other on a deeper level during this time because there aren't any other distractions. We aren't being distracted by our busyness or by our schedules or by other things that we felt were important. We're honing in and really starting to get to the essence of what is really important to us, not only as individuals, but as a faith community. And one of the things in talking with our Deep Pod, which is a group of people who come together to listen for where the Spirit is at work amongst us. The Deep Pod stands for Discerning, Envisioning, and Policy. So they look at the big picture of our church. And these very dedicated group of volunteers spend time noticing, watching, listening, reflecting, and sharing back what it is that they have heard. So one of the things that I shared at our Zoom meeting last night was how much I've appreciated people's willingness to just call up their minister, to call their minister up with questions, with wonderings, with heartache, with fears. Many years ago, I was given a resource that I wanted to share with you today, and it's called The Invitation. And it is written by Oria Mountain Dreamer, an Indian elder. I think there's so much we can learn from our elders, and I can't stress enough how much I appreciate the elders in our own faith community, within our own families, the wisdom that they bring, especially being that they have gone through so much in their lives. So I want to read through this invitation first, fully. It's going to feel very dense and very thick. And then after that, I want to start pulling it apart a little bit more. But truly, this is the invitation that I want to give to you. People talk about how, if I ask them, how are you? People wonder, do they really want to know how I am? And when Reverend Lee asks you how you are, we're talking about the spiritual stuff. How are you spiritually speaking? And this might help us to understand a little bit more by what we mean and what we're hoping that we can share as Christians in our church families. Sometimes sharing in our church families is a little bit easier than even our own families because it doesn't come with the long-standing experience of who we once were, what we once cared about. There's no assumptions made about who we are and what we value or long for. There sometimes feels like there's less judgment in a faith community as well because people don't know us as well. But the whole point of this is that we want to get to know each other. So I'm going to read this to you without any further ado. This is called The Invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream or dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. I want to know if you can be with joy, and if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, or to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint others, to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusations of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithful and therefore be trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty, even when it is not pretty every day. And if you can source your life from God's presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of a lake and shout out to the silver moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. It doesn't interest me who you are, how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me whether or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Like I said, this invitation is dense and requires a lot of faith, a lot of openness, and a lot of trust. Know that when Reverend Lee or myself are asking you this, it's because we want to know who you are. We want to know the essence of you. We want to know each other in the way that God knows us. I've tried to break this apart a little bit so we can do some self-reflection, so that when people start to ask these questions of one another, you might be able to answer them. You might even remember how to ask these questions if you've answered them yourself. And some of them are going to be easier than others, and some of them you might need more time to work on, and that's okay. Our scriptures talk about what God knows about who we are. And the first scripture that comes to mind is from the Psalms, Psalm 139. And I think it kind of, I think captures our faith and what God is saying, and is very similar to this invitation. The idea that God knows us through and through. And so it says in Psalm 139, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down, when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away, and you search out my path and my lying down, and you are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O God, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence?" God knows us. How are we going to find a way to truly know each other in a deep way? When I first read this invitation, the first statement kind of made me go, hey, wait, what is it that doesn't interest you, but that's how I define myself? So the first statement in this invitation said, "It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. Interesting. During fellowship and in church, one of the first things we ask each other is, oh, and what is it that you do? I'd love to reframe that. I would love to move to a place where we can ask our spiritual friends and our spiritual family, what is it you ache for? And will you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing? What is it that you long for? We hear story after story of Jesus speaking to people and getting to that core, finding out what it is they truly long for. Whether it's Mary sitting at his feet, longing for that knowledge, for that connection with a teacher who loved her for who she was. Whether it, there's just so many examples, but what I want to know is what it is you long for. I'm going to encourage you today to find a blank piece of paper and start doodling, start brainstorming and letting out what is your heart's desire. So if you're to draw a big heart, what is it your heart longs for the most? What is it you desire the most? Is it knowledge? Is it love? Is it belonging, acceptance? What's that ache? What's that longing? Many people come to the church because of that longing or ache that just something's not being filled. And then they find that peace, that essence, being part of a faith community and believing in what God has offered. So, I'm not going to ask you what you do for a living anymore. I'm going to ask you what it is you ache for. So what is it you are aching for? Those of you who are watching, I would love to know a little bit about it if you are willing. You can always email me as well at another time if you prefer not to share it with the whole world. The next statement was, it doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. Will you risk looking a fool for these things? I think I've proven it over time that I am willing to risk being a fool for the adventure of being alive, for seeing the world as it is and what it provides us. I love playing. I love all ages. The things I learn from a 4-year-old, the things I learn from a 21-year-old, 35-year-old, 104-year-old are all really important. And that's, I think, the other thing about being in a faith community is the wisdom that comes from all people. Hearing about people's adventures can be inspiring. They can get us to do things we wouldn't even consider. And sometimes that's what helps us to live abundantly. Jesus came so that we could have life and have it in abundance. So why would we shy away from that? Why would we instead be fearful and not want to just jump out there and try something new? So think about it. What's your answer? Are you willing to risk looking a fool? It always amazes me how many people don't come to church because they've fallen or hurt themselves, or they don't feel like they look like they're supposed to. They're not taking the risk to come and be fulfilled and to be seen for who they are. And I think that's what faith community is about. The next statement is quite large, and it says, it doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you've touched the center of your sorrow. If you have been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or yours, without moving to hide it, fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with wilderness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, or to remember the limitations of being human. Interesting, when we're in faith communities, that's often when we do open ourselves up. and people do release some of their pain, and those can be really powerful moments for people. I have shared with the congregation once an experience I had in a church where it was a class I was taking, a theological class, and we were invited to pick up an object of some sort off a table, and I hate risking things. I hate putting myself out there, but we were supposed to go pick an object and then go and do something with it. And I tried not to overthink it, which I love to do. And as I reached in, I ended up pulling out a water gun. And I can remember in that moment thinking, of course I got a water gun, and now we're supposed to do something with it. So, being willing to risk looking like a fool, I walked out of the room that we were in and ended up in a sanctuary, very much like Robertson Wesley's sanctuary. And I had a water gun, and I was debating and really struggling with the sense of wanting to play Mission Impossible, but then worrying about, should I take a gun into the sanctuary? It seems wrong. And as I went in anyways, and I sat down in a pew, and I was looking up at the front, and there was this beautiful cross at the top, and I'm holding my water gun. It was in that moment that it dawned on me that I had been fighting with God for a long time, not believing that God was calling me to do leadership in the church, or that I was even worthy of it, because I didn't feel I knew enough. I always felt inadequate, and that, I fought God for a long time. And as I sat there and I lifted my water gun, I shot the cross with my water gun, and it was in that moment that I felt a sense of release or relief, almost like the waters were flooding out of me, that I had finally accepted that I did believe in God, and that I knew God would be there for me to walk me through this calling. It was a very powerful moment, and one that I just had to sit with. I was on my own at the time, but there were others in the sanctuary, and then finding the strength to share that story with others, because it was really quite a profound, transformative moment for me in my faith journey. And I wonder, what have been yours? What pains have kept you from doing what it is you are called to do? What joys hold you back? Sometimes we're so joyful that we feel like we can't go and do the hard stuff because, we finally found this joy and it's great. Sometimes we become realistic. Sometimes we think, this is just foolishness. We shouldn't do it. I'm an adult. I don't do these things. I shouldn't do these things. I should know better. Interesting, again, in the Bible, there's some other scriptures. In 2 Corinthians chapter 7, it talks a bit about grief. And it's fun to kind of hear some different perspectives. 2 Corinthians is one of the letters in the New Testament, or in the Christian scriptures. I finally found it. All right, I'm going to read you just a little bit of this. Make room, so this is chapter 7, starting at verse 2. Make room in your hearts for us. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have taken advantage of no one. I do not say this to condemn you, for I said before that you are in our hearts, to die together and to live together. I often boast about you. I have great pride in you. I am filled with consolation. I am overjoyed in all our affliction. For even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were afflicted in every way, disputes without and fear within. But God, who consoles the downcast, consoles us by the arrival of Titus. And not only by God's coming, but also by the consolation with which God was consoled about you, as God told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me. So I rejoice still more. For even if I made you sorry with my letter, I do not regret it, though I did regret it, for I see that I grieved you with the letter, though only briefly. Now I rejoice, not because you were grieved, but because your grief led to repentance. For you felt a godly grief, so that you were not harmed in any way by us. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation and brings no regret, but worldly grief produces death. For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you, what eagerness to clear yourselves, what indignation, what alarm, what longing, what zeal, what punishment. At every point, you proved yourself guiltless in this matter. So although I wrote to you, it was not on account of the one who did the wrong, nor on the account of the one who was wronged, but in order that your zeal for us might be made known to you before God. In this we find comfort. In this we find comfort. How do we find comfort in what God offers us, in the love and forgiveness and grace, in order to be able to sit with people in sorrow and in grief? That is one of the important roles that we have as a faith community, is how we sit with one another in grief and sorrow, repentance, joy, healing, relief, release, all of these things. But we need to remember not to limit ourselves to human things, for we believe in God, which is above human things. The next section, which is interesting, says, it doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another, to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusations of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithful and therefore be trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day, and if you can source your life from God's presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silvery moon, yes. Do you have the courage and trust to be true? How can you be true to yourself in this time? What is it that you can do? Putting our trust in God, or as this suggests, making the source of your life from God's presence. What does that look like or feel like? How does that prepare us for something? It's interesting, in Jeremiah, one of the other prophets, there's a verse that I really like and enjoy. It's in Jeremiah 17. And it talks about God's love and trust and what that can do for us when we truly believe and have faith. I'll get to it in just a second. There we are. It says, blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. I wonder what this passage says to us today in this time of COVID and the pandemic, that even in times of drought or times when we can't physically be with one another, if we have trust in God, we know that it will not always be like that we will continue to bear fruit. And that's been my experience, is that we are still bearing fruit and we are still nourished by our faith, even though we aren't physically together in our church building, in our church home. Our home is where the people are. And so learning from one another has been really interesting in this time. And I think a great source of lots of stuff. So, do you trust in God is the next question I have for you. And what does that look like for you? The invitation goes on to say, it doesn't interest me to know where you live and how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. Are you interested and able to advocate? Would you stand up for people who are less fortunate, who are being oppressed? That is what we know Jesus has taught us to do. It's what we're called to as a faith community, is how we reach out and care for one another and advocate for one another in those times of despair. And even when we're feeling exhausted and weary, will you have the strength to do that? Or as the next one says, it doesn't interest me who you are, how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. Will you stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back? Spiritual friendship is the type of friendship that is there for us in those really difficult times. And I think back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Old Testament, who were thrown into a fiery furnace, but they were not burned. They came out because God protected them in those moments. And I think that we too can find strength in our faith that will allow us to do things that put us in harm's way sometimes, that can present us with danger. And I hope that our faith will give us that courage as long as we trust in God to do that. And I go into the prophets today. Isaiah chapter 43 has beautiful words that I think are just so wonderful to keep in mind in this time, when it says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I've called you by name, and you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Because you are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you. When you pass through raging waters, I will be with you. In the sea, you shall not drown. If you walk through burning flames, you shall not be burned." Are we able to be there for one another in those times of real danger? The last statement of this invitation says, "It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied, so your credentials aren't that important. What I want to know is what sustains you from inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments." There are many stories of mystics who have gone off and been on their own for a very long time, and what has sustained them is their relationship with God, that sense of being in a very intimate relationship with God. And what sustains them is their prayer, their dialogue, their exchange, their feeling of being like a bride to a groom. And I think for me, in the times that have been most parched, or in those times of real despair, wandering, not knowing what's next, what sustains me is often these passages that I've been sharing with you today. Passage from Isaiah. There's one from Romans that I always like. There's so many words of wisdom within this. I mean, even hearing Ecclesiastes, it says, "For everything there is a time." That can be a comfort. I think back to how a lot of the Psalms have really supported people during war times, during times when we have lost somebody. Where is it and what is it that sustains you from the inside when all else has fallen away? What gives you hope? What gives you nourishment? What keeps your faith? Honestly, sometimes it's been my spiritual friends who have helped to sustain me. It could be their questions that they've asked. Sometimes it's the music, the words, and the melody together that have sustained me. Sometimes it is simply just being out in nature. And this, all of these pieces of this invitation that I read today, like I said, people in the church really do want to know who each other is. We want to be there for each other, especially in this time. And it's happening. And I hope that we can continue to move past those obvious societal questions that we ask. How are you? What do you do? Oh, which generation are you part of? As a way of trying to know people. But when I've truly known people, it's when they've shared their prayers, when they've shared who they're praying for in this time, because they're either worried about them, they're not well, they care about them, or the things in the world that people care about. Like, where is your passion? What is it that you ache for? So I hope that, if nothing else, that this pandemic will encourage you to have the strength and courage to move beyond that surface and to truly get to know one another, and to trust that you will not be judged, that you will be loved, that you belong, that every one of you is important in God's eyes. And that you are each a precious gift called to do something, whether it's to be a prophet, to simply be that presence, that person that is able to sit with someone in their pain and their joy and not have that need to fix it or hide it or brush it away. We want to truly be open and honest with one another. And I think our faith gives us the skills and the gifts to do that. Our leaders provide us with the encouragement to do that, and our friends give us the space to do that. So as we go from here today, take time to reflect on that. Create for yourself a vision board of what it is that you are. Who are you? Like I said, what's the essence of who you are? That's what I want to know. I'd love to discover, and I would love to share a little bit more of who I am, knowing that God knows us. And it's still important for us to articulate that and share that with the world. And sometimes God is very insistent and find ways for us to do this. And other times, yeah, it's a mystery sometimes. Total mystery. So, like I said, ask your friends different questions. We've all been checking in on each other. How are you doing? Maybe ask them this week what it is they're aching for. What is it that they're longing for in this time? Maybe ask them what their dreams is, or what they're grieving right now. What is it that you're grieving in this time? There's a lot of things that even as a faith community we are grieving the fact that we probably won't be able to be together for quite a few more months. And even when we do, we probably won't be able to sing together. We probably won't be able to feast together. But we will be able to sit together, to be present to one another, to listen to one another, and to truly see each other as Christ and as God sees us. So go in peace this week, and know that tomorrow Laura will be exploring some stuff with you about embracing solitude, which kind of gets to that last statement of the invitation. So play around with it, reflect on it, and feel free to share with me any of your thoughts and ideas, because I truly want to know who you are. And that is the invitation that God offers us, that Jesus offers us, that we offer each other. So go in peace, friends, and serve this world in love. See you later. Bye.